Forgive me for this long and rambling post, but I feel like I need to try my best to organize my thoughts and write down everything I know that has occurred in the last few months that has led me to suspect that my wife is having an affair. First, some background. My wife and I are both mid-30s. We have been married for almost a decade and were together for 5 years before marriage. We have 2 children under 5. She is the breadwinner and works from home while I am the stay-at-home dad. We spend a lot of time together and for the most part have always loved it that way. In recent years, mainly after the birth of our second child, she has become more depressed and our relationship hasn't had the joy it once did. Our bedroom is anything but dead. We have always had an active *X life, but it seemed as though in the last couple years I found her wanting to spend more time at her friend's house or reading alone in the evenings. This made me sad that she didn't want to spend as much time with me as I did with her, but I did my best to accept that she was under a lot of stress and not be too needy. I may have not always succeeded in that. In the last year we also started to fight more often than before, often over very inconsequential things, and divorce was being threatened frequently in these arguments, always by her. I would always do my best to try to convince her it was a terrible idea and plead with her to reconsider, and she always did, but these discussions worried me greatly and made it very hard for me to feel secure in the relationship. Ultimately, though, I was terrified to lose her and maybe went into denial about how terrible of a sign it was that she was mentioning splitting up so often. With that out of the way, let me do my best to explain what has happened in our relationship and lead us to the separation and likely divorce that is coming. Over the last year or so my wife has been traveling around our state doing work trips that usually require a one-night hotel stay. Back in May, 3 days after she returned from one of these trips, I happened to be cleaning out her bag, something I have always done for her and something she has never considered to be crossing a boundary, and I found a receipt, white paper with proof of purchases on it, for a purchase made at a grocery store by her hotel. The purchase, that was made at around 6 p.m., was for beer, from her favorite microbrewery, and cost $11.99. This immediately concerned me because not only was the beer her favorite, but that night she had told me multiple times, once on the phone and twice via text, that she was extremely tired and would be going to bed at 7 o'clock. At the time it seemed very strange that she would fall asleep that early, because she never does. It's almost always 9 o'clock, and it also seemed weird that she was mentioning to me her plans to fall asleep at 7 o'clock so frequently. Sure enough, after I put our kids down for bed I texted her at around 7:10 and got no response for the rest of the night. I gave her a call as well and got one ring then sent to voicemail, which indicates a manually declined call. This sent me into a bit of a panic and I called again, but this time it rang out all the way until voicemail. I barely slept that night wondering about the declined call, but eventually convinced myself it was probably a dropped call and stopped worrying about things when she texted me in the morning that everything was fine. But then of course a few days later I found that receipt. When I confronted her with it she immediately seemed flustered and claimed that yes, she had went to the grocery store but didn't buy any beer. She claimed that she had bought, like a Pepsi. I think Pepsi just popped into her head as the thing to say because she had told me she bought one at a mini-mart a few weeks before when she went in and they didn't have what she wanted, but she felt awkward and inclined to buy something so she just chose that. She never buys Pepsi. I then remembered that on that night she had mentioned that she went to a fast food restaurant for dinner. When I asked her why she didn't just get a Pepsi there with her meal, they sell it, she said that she didn't go into the grocery store with the intent of getting a Pepsi, but instead getting a kombucha, but she passed on that because it was $6 and the Pepsi happened to be stocked right next to it. This immediately seemed wrong as well, so I opened the app for that grocery store, changed the location to the store she was at and looked up the prices for every SKU of kombucha in the store. They were all $3.50. Furthermore, Pepsi and kombucha were not stocked next to one another. The app shows the aisle locations of every item in the store. While I was in the app, one also found that the only beer in the store from that brewery that was priced at $11.99 was a 4-pack of 16 ounces cans of her absolute favorite variety from that specific microbrewery. Obviously she could not admit to buying this beer because then she would have to explain why she bought 64 ounces of IPA to chug by herself on a work night an hour before she claimed to have fallen asleep and stopped responding to me. So she simply stuck with the story that she didn't buy the beer. First she suggested that she must have gotten someone else's receipt. But instead of investigating the receipt and attempting to confirm that theory, she took it from my hands, crumpled it up and threw it away. When she left the room I immediately fished the receipt from the trash can and matched the last 4 digits of the credit card on the receipt to a credit card in her bag, This is the only credit card she has that I'm not an authorized user on and therefore can't read statements and don't get immediate notifications for transactions. When I confronted her about it being her receipt, suddenly her tone completely changed. She didn't even continue to deny it or act confused. She went on to the offensive, claiming I was snooping, that I allow her no autonomy, that I was paranoid, and that she couldn't believe I was questioning whether or not she cheated. During this time she was incredibly enraged, hands trembling, yelling, etc., but we had to immediately pull ourselves together because we were literally minutes away from heading out the door to attend our daughter's Mother's Day performance at her preschool. On the drive over there I continued to gently press her about the receipt and she ended up screaming at me and cussing me out in the parking garage with our 2-year-old son in the back seat. She then began to threaten divorce, which she knew would scare me into backing off, and it did. I lied and told her I believed her and we tried to attend the performance acting as though nothing had just happened. Once we returned home I convinced her that she should at least contact the grocery store and try to get her money back. She agreed reluctantly and called them. On this call she gave unnecessary details about why she chose a Pepsi and claimed she bought it on sale for $1.99, which according to the app is not the regular price or a sale price. They left her with a reference number and said they would escalate the issue and have someone call her back. That escalated call would never come, or so she claims. A few days later, when I suggested she call them back if she wasn't hearing from them, she began to primal shriek at me, threatened divorce, and said she would never be calling them again and she was done talking about it forever. She said she couldn't believe I was making a huge deal about $10, as if my concerns were all about money. On the phone they offered some theories as to what could have happened. First, she said they suggested that the wrong code could have been entered into their system and Pepsis could have been popping up as beer. To that I replied that the receipt showed that the item was bought in self-checkout and was ID verified. Seems unlikely that you could get through the ID check process while holding a Pepsi without you or the employee realizing your purchase rung up as beer. She then landed on the excuse that someone else must have scanned the beer, got ID checked, then walked out without paying. Then she came up, failed to scan her Pepsi, and accidentally bought the beer without noticing on the screen or payment terminal that she was buying the wrong item for the wrong amount. This seemed like a nearly impossible explanation, but I wanted to believe her so badly that I just tried to convince myself that maybe it was true. After the call to the store she began texting me about how she didn't think she could continue in our relationship and that she had considered taking all the pills in my bedside drawer. These threats of divorce and suicide scared me into continuing on pretending like nothing was wrong for another week or so. I guess I just kind of froze. Some weeks later I finally got the courage to confront her about the declined call. She claimed that she didn't decline my call at all, so I had her look in her phone and check, and sure enough it was a declined call. This made her extremely upset, but she claimed that she must have done it in her sleep. This excuse immediately seemed fishy because the morning after she fell asleep at 7 o'clock I asked her at around 5 a.m. about how she managed to sleep for 10 hours. She claimed that she was awake from around 1 to 3 a.m. and couldn't sleep, but then added that she didn't see my texts because she never looked at her phone because it was across the room charging. So how exactly could she have declined my phone call with her phone across the room? She had already told me that she didn't wear her smartwatch that night because it was irritating her wrist. This was in response to me suggesting that she show me her sleep data from that night to prove that she had actually fallen asleep at 7 o'clock. So with no reasonable way to explain how she could have declined my call on either her phone or her watch, she admitted that she lied about not having her phone beside her because she was just so worried that I would freak out about her not responding that she needed a good excuse for why she wasn't in touch that night. She claimed she woke up in a complete panic about not responding to my texts, because I'm so controlling, and just made up a lie. This also doesn't check out because I happened to open our text conversation that morning about 30 seconds before I saw all my missed texts suddenly mark as read, and she began typing her first message of the morning. Within 1 minute of those messages getting marked as read, she told me she was already in the hotel lobby getting coffee. If someone wakes up in a panic that they missed texts, they would probably check them immediately from bed or at least from the toilet or at some point while getting dressed. The fact that her first texts to me came from her in the lobby suggests that she knew all those missed texts were there. She was just taking her time to reply to them when she felt ready. Now that her official story was that her phone was indeed in the bed, I continued to gently press her about how it was possible that she declined my call in her sleep. On our phones, declining a call requires pressing and holding the button and dragging it down to decline. This seems like an impossible thing to do in your sleep, and I mentioned that to her. She responded by starting to shriek at the top of her lungs and threatening to jump from the car while it was moving. These threats eventually died out and were replaced with more threats of divorce if I didn't stop interrogating her and making her feel on trial. So naturally I backed off. We have 2 kids and a house and I didn't want to be divorced. I was scared. I wanted to believe her. I spent the better part of the next 5 months trying my best to suppress all my feelings about this situation, but ultimately I ended up confronting her about it in one way or another pretty consistently. I was desperate for her to come clean because I wanted to be able to move forward. I told her I could try to reconcile. I also wanted so badly to believe her that I would fish for reassurance that nothing happened and then try to convince myself I believed her.